Halloween in most towns is a time for innocent, spooky fun, where kids dress in their favorite costumes and receive sugary treats in exchange for withholding harmless tricks. But not in Nevermore Hollows. That is because Nevermore Hollows is one of those strange places scattered around the world, where the wall between the natural and the supernatural realms is often breached, and especially on Halloween, the princes of that ghostly realm break loose on the small town, and with them, they bring nightmares. Morningstar Sanitarium is a gothic behemoth that sits on a cliff overlooking the bay. In the north wing, the patients are those who are convalescing from addiction and from nervous breakdowns, while the south wing is inhabited by the criminally insane. It was just after 11 p.m. on Halloween night, and the waning crescent moon hung in the dark sky like a psychotic grin. Its phantasmal glow illuminated the massive ornate gate that stood before the sanitarium. A small guard shack was positioned at the gate, casting its own weak light, and Eli Patterson sat inside, reading a Robert R. McCammon novel. Visiting hours were over at 7, and the staff inside the sanitarium was operated by a skeleton crew of a nurse, the live-in janitor, 2 orderlies, and a sheriff's deputy who moonlighted on occasion as a security guard. A long, thin road led up to the gate. It was lined on both sides by sprawling live oaks, the branches of which snaked out over the lane, creating a shady canopy during the day, a dark tunnel at night. Eli paused from his reading to take a sip of coffee, and was surprised to see a man dressed as a clown walk from those black shadows into the pale glow of the moon. He was dressed in the style of a Perrault clown, with an oversized blouse and pants, and a conical dunce hat. The ensemble had once been bright white, accented with 3 large black pom-poms on the front of the blouse and 2 on the hat. But now the fabric was dirty, torn in places, and splattered in what appeared to be dried blood. Around the clown's neck was a spiked dog collar, affixed to a leash. The leash was held by a capuchin monkey that was dressed in a tiny red suit and bow tie patterned with black pentagrams. Both the clown and the monkey had their faces smeared with white grease paint, and around each of their eyes was scrawled a black swirl. Eli sat his book down and stood. Knowing this was Halloween, he was sure this was some kind of prank or dare cooked up by the local kids. Someone was likely hiding in the woods filming so that they could put it up on YouTube. But if he was being honest, he had to applaud their effort because it was creepy as hell. He stepped out of the guard shack with the intent to shoo them away, but stopped cold when the hairs on his neck and arms stood straight and his skin puckered into goosebumps. There was something off about these two. At first sight, he had thought the blood on the clown was fake, but upon closer inspection, he wasn't so sure. The poor guy looked as if he had taken a beating. One eye was swollen shut, he was missing his left ear, and his nose had been broken and the blood had become smeared with the black and white grease paint on his chin. It had splattered down the front of his grimy blouse. Eli thought, if this is makeup, the person who did it needs to be working in Hollywood. The clown raised his left hand and waved. The pinky finger was broken and twisted at a disgusting angle. Eli instinctively put his hand on his holstered weapon, though he still clung to the idea that this was an elaborate Halloween prank. He cleared his throat and said, "Okay now, you got me. That's some pretty damn good makeup, but this is a restricted area and you need to turn around and leave." The clown continued to slowly wave. His one good eye seemed unfocused, lacking the spark of life. Eli had seen that look before. It was the look of a person whose spirit had been completely broken. Keeping his hand on his holstered weapon, he used the other to key the mic on his radio and alert the moonlighting deputy inside the sanitarium that he needed backup. But the radio was dead, even though he knew it had been fully charged at the beginning of his shift at 10 o'clock. His skin prickled coldly from the dark energy that radiated from the clown. He slid his gun from the holster and held it pointed down at the ground. "I need you to vacate the area now," he said. Though his voice was stern, it wavered with fear. Eli shot a quick glance around, looking for any other signs of danger. The pale moonlight was not enough to see anything beyond the weak circle of light spilling from the shack. Anyone could be hiding in those black shadows, though his instinct told him that the threat was directly in front of him. He chided himself when he realized he'd left his cell phone sitting in the shack. But he had a sinking feeling in his gut that told him that the phone would be as dead as the radio. As he considered his next step, he was surprised when the monkey gave a deep, ominous laugh. He tore his gaze from the clown and noticed that the monkey was holding what looked to be a small red bouncy ball in his right hand. Then his surprise turned to heart-stopping shock when the animal spoke in a human voice infected with simian cadence.
"Let me introduce myself. I'm Psycho Juju, and I come to bring madness."
Eli's mind reeled. He heard himself as if from a great distance say, "How are you doing that? This can't be real."
"Oh, but it is. Let's play catch."
He tossed the red ball at Eli, who instinctively caught it in his left hand. He looked at it and realized that it wasn't a ball, but instead was a smooth, round hand grenade that had been painted red. In black stenciling was written, "Trick or treat," and the pin had already been pulled. "No!" Eli yelled, his heart hammering. He turned, intending to toss the grenade into the darkness behind the guard shack, but before he could, the grenade exploded. It had not been packed with a full charge, only enough to disintegrate Eli's hand and fling hot shrapnel into his torso and face. Eli staggered back against the guard shack in a spray of blood. He slipped to the ground and writhed in agony. The clown, with his blank expression of broken spirit, shuffled to him, lifted his foot, and stomped down, breaking Eli's neck. Psycho Juju gave a deep, half-simian, half-human laugh.
"I guess it's trick."
As if by some supernatural force, the gate swung open. Psycho Juju yanked hard on the clown's leash, and they walked into the sanitarium. With a flick of the monkey's wrist, the front door swung open, allowing them access. They stood in a large, dimly lit foyer in front of a check-in desk, which was unoccupied due to visiting hours being long past. All the lights in the massive building had been deeply dimmed to facilitate better circadian rhythms for the patients. Just behind the desk was a long hallway that housed the administration offices, which were also empty. Branching off from this main hallway were the two wings that housed the patients. Psycho Juju smiled, baring his 4 long razor-sharp fangs. With his grease paint-smeared face and black swirls around his eyes, he looked both ferocious and psychotic.
Oh, it's playtime.
While the evil little monkey and his clown pet were preparing to unleash chaos in the sanitarium, Clyde Tolan and Levita Rose were sitting in the break room. They had just finished their 11 o'clock rounds and were drinking coffee and discussing who was the better thriller writer. Clyde was firmly in the Stephen King camp, while Levita argued that Dean Koontz was the better of the two because of the hope he infused into his stories.
Don't get me wrong. I love me some King, but sometimes his characters seem to be just fighting to survive. While that Koontz, now he writes characters who fight to make the world a better place.
Levita was a 28-year-old black woman with an affinity for the 1970s aesthetic. When not on duty as a Nevermore Hollows sheriff's deputy or moonlighting as a security guard at Morningstar, she was often seen dressed in hip-hugger jeans, boots, and a loose blouse, topped off with a Foxy Brown-style afro that she thought made her look fabulous. And while Levita was, in fact, a very attractive woman, she was no diva. She had earned the respect of Sheriff Mosley and her peers by being able to hold her own in dangerous situations. When most people saw Clyde, they wrote him off as an old hippie with his long gray ponytail, granny glasses, and flared jeans. But Clyde was much more dangerous than any septuagenarian pothead. Clyde was a slayer of gnomes. And not the gnomes of classical literature with pointy hats and pudgy bellies and kind eyes. Real gnomes were feral, evil, and deadly. They used magic to disguise themselves as the cute creatures of lore, then would trick their victims into ingesting psychotropic mushrooms, which caused their brains to secrete a specific chemical. The gnomes craved this chemical, and they would use their needle-sharp teeth to crack open their victims' skulls and eat their chemical-laden brains.
Now, I don't disagree with you, but come on now. King is the horror king for a reason. His characters may be flawed more so than those that Koontz writes, but they are awesome.
Levita shook her head.
Come on now, baby. Nobody remembers any of King's protagonists. They only remember the monsters like Annie Wilkes, Jack Torrance, and Pennywise.
Wilma Foster, the night nurse on duty, walked into the break room.
Paul Sheldon,
she said. Levita and Clyde turned their attention to her. Clyde said,
Who's that? A patient?
Wilma was 35, pretty though she didn't think she was, and a damn good nurse.
No, silly. That was the writer that Annie Wilkes kept hostage in Misery.
Levita leaned confidently back in her chair and flashed her brilliant smile.
Ah, see, Clyde, baby, you only remember the bad guy in that story. And anyway, I claim that Paul was less of a hero than he was a victim.
Wilma poured herself a cup of coffee, then leaned back against the counter. She took a thoughtful sip.
You know, Levita, you may be right. He wasn't a hero, but I rooted for him all the same. Anyway, I just completed my rounds on the north wing, Everyone is settled in and resting well. How's Elsie doing, sugar?
Levita asked. Elsie Mitchener was a 13-year-old girl who'd had a tragic month. The first day of October, her mother suffered a heart attack. Her dad was headed to the hospital to be by her side, but in his haste ran a red light and was killed when his car was T-boned by a dump truck. Later that afternoon, her mother also died when she had a reaction to the medication to stabilize her. It was too much for poor Elsie to bear, and she had suffered a nervous breakdown. Her Aunt Martha, who would now be her caretaker, admitted her to Morningstar Sanitarium to rest and recover.
That poor girl's had it so rough, but I'm happy to say that she's come a long way. I'm thinking maybe a week or two and she'll be ready to go home,
Wilma said.
That's great news. She's such a sweet girl. So, we have an hour or so to kill before we have to do our rounds again. Anybody want to play poker?
Ooh, I'm down. Let's invite Lee and Davy. I know they're douchebags, but they're terrible at cards and we can take all their money,
Levita said. Lee Martinez and Davy Dane were the two third-shift orderlies. Lee was 40 and had worked at Morningstar for 10 years, while Davy was only 17 and it was his second week on the job. They were stocking the supply room on the second floor of the north wing when Levita asked them via the radio if they wanted to join in on the poker game. Lee gave a questioning look at Davy, who nodded in the affirmative. He keyed the mic and said, "We're in, but it'll take about 10 minutes for us to finish up here."
Sounds good. See you in a few,
Levita said. Davy looked like a Calvin Klein model. He was handsome and fit, with ocean blue eyes and a polar white smile. Because he came from wealth and influence, he was also an entitled brat. The only reason he was working at the sanitarium was because his dad, a powerful attorney, arranged it as part of community service instead of jail time after Davy had slapped Darla Ruse when she wouldn't let him have his way with her on their first date. Lee was big, beefy, with long greasy hair, and though he'd never in his life been in a fight, he carried himself as if he were a badass. Levita questioned the sanity of the judge who thought it was wise to make Davy work the night shift with such a terrible role model as Lee. "We're already done here," Davy said. "Why did you tell her it would be 10 minutes? Lee's lips curled into a predatory grin. "I thought we'd head over to the north wing and take a peek at Camilla." Davy's face lit up. "Yeah, let's do that. She's so freaking hot, man. Just looking at her gets me riled up." Camilla Cage was 20, Hollywood pretty, and broken. 5 nights ago, she was found walking along the highway, covered in blood, though it was not her own, mumbling that she had been forced to wear someone else's skin. Whatever the truth was of what had happened to her, it left her in an extremely agitated state. She refused to wear any clothing whatsoever, wanting only to pace her room completely nude. Dr. Sledgeboom, the sanitarium's director, kept her heavily medicated so that they could dress her in a hospital gown. But sometimes she would fight through her drug-induced haze and remove the gown. Lee looked at his watch. "Old Sledgeboom gave her a dose of the crazy folk medicine at 8 o'clock this evening. I bet she's had enough time to fight through it and is as naked as the day she was born. Let's go." They stepped out of the supply room and started down the hallway toward Camilla's room with wicked thoughts on their minds, when suddenly the lights, which were already dimmed for the evening, blinked out. They were enveloped in complete darkness, which seemed to mirror the state of their souls, for 3 long heartbeats before the emergency lights blinked on. "Well, that's never happened in the 10 years I've been here," Lee said. Each wing had 2 levels, and each level had only one emergency light on the wall halfway down the hallway, which only served to deepen the shadows. There was also a single red exit sign above the door that led to the stairway, which splashed a bloody glow onto the floor. "Damn, man, this is creepy," Davy said. The gloom of the south wing also made Lee uneasy, but he was too much an alpha male to admit it. "Suck it up, girly boy. Be a man already." He took a moment to consider what they should do. "I bet a breaker or 2 got thrown. Let's go see if we can fix it and get the lights back on." "But isn't the electrical room in the basement?" Davy asked. Lee smirked. "Yeah? So, are you a man or ain't you?" Davy didn't like being called a girly boy or having his manliness questioned. So he stood straighter, nodded toward the end of the hallway, and said, "Follow me, old man." They made it 2/3 of the way when the stairwell door opened, and into the blood-colored pool of light stepped the battered clown, followed by Psycho Juju. Davy and Lee stopped cold. "What the hell?" Lee said, now unable to control a quiver in his voice. In the clown's left hand was a pistol. Psycho Juju tugged on the leash as if giving a command, and the clown raised it and fired. The bullet hit Lee in the thigh, causing him to drop to the floor. Lee pushed his hand against the wound to stop the blood. "You shot me, you son of a bitch! What the hell did you do that for?" Davy, willing to leave his boss behind, turned to run, but the clown fired another shot that tore through his shoulder. He screamed and stumbled into the wall. Psycho Juju laughed.
Stop your whining. They're only flesh wounds.
When he had stunned the 2 men into silence by speaking, he said,
Now, take me to the girl named Elsie Mitchener.
Back in the break room, Clyde had just volunteered to go to the basement to see if he could get the lights turned back on when they heard the 2 gunshots. Levita shot up from her chair and pulled her Glock 40 from its holster. Clyde reached over to his janitorial supply cart, which carried a mop and bucket, various cleaning supplies, and a sawed-off shotgun that he kept hidden under a layer of cleaning rags. He snatched the shotgun and pumped a round into the chamber. Wilma was scared, but she was also concerned that Clyde had a hidden shotgun.
Why do you have that?
Clyde knew that most people in Nevermore Hollows refused to believe in the idea of a paranormal creature, even when it was cracking open their skulls and eating their brains, and therefore were woefully unprepared when attacked. He wasn't sure if the current danger was somehow linked to the paranormal and did not know where Wilma stood on the subject, so he decided to simply say,
"We're locked inside a sanitarium with criminally insane patients. I don't take chances."
Wilma hesitated as she considered this, then gave a nod.
Well, that sounds prudent.
She opened a drawer beside the sink and snatched a knife. Levita grabbed her phone and tried to call the sheriff.
I don't have any cell service. Do either of you?
Clyde and Wilma checked. Neither of them did.
What do you think is happening?
Wilma said. Clyde shook his head.
"Not sure. but it seems like a coincidence that someone is firing shots and there's no cell service. And I don't believe in coincidences.
Levita knew that Clyde would defer to her leadership because he respected her and the badge, but she was smart enough to know that he was wise in the way of battle.
What you thinking, baby?
Clyde thoughtfully pushed his granny glasses further up on his nose.
Well, we don't split up for any reason, and we don't make any horror movie mistakes.
Levita nodded.
Gotcha. I ain't never been a cliche, and I ain't about to start now. I couldn't tell where them shots came from, but there are cameras in the security room. Let's make it there and get our eyes on the situation.
They stepped out of the break room, Levita in the lead, Clyde bringing up the rear, Wilma in the middle. To the right was a short hallway that led toward the back of the building where the administrative offices were located, which included the security office. Beyond that was a large room that served as a commons area. They paused to listen. It was quiet, and they saw no movement, not that it would have been easy to do considering the deep gloom. The corridor they stood in ran east to west. To their left, it intersected with the north and south wings of the building. Across that intersection was the desk that sat at the entrance to the sanitarium. The only light came from the ghostly glow of an emergency light above the large, ornate doors. On a hunch, Clyde said,
Maybe we should see if we can get the front door open.
Levita shot him a glance and nodded. They quickly made their way over, and she swiped her key card, but the doors would not open. Clyde and Wilma tried theirs, but still the doors remained unlocked.
That's odd. The door should be on a different system so we can get out. Hopefully, we can get into my office and use the landline, and then we can call out.
They quietly made their way back to the security office. Levita was able to open the door with her key card, and they stepped inside. She tried the landline phone that hung on the wall. There was no signal.
I don't like that we can't call out, but we still have access to the cameras and interior doors.
Yeah. Seems like somebody or something is playing with us.
There were over a dozen security cameras, which also provided sound, placed throughout the building. Every hallway and every room that was not a patient's room had one. They all were displayed in a grid on a large flat-screen monitor that hung on the wall. Each camera feed could be pulled up to the full screen as needed. All of them showed darkened rooms and corridors, except for one. One room still had light, and it caught Levita's eye, and she said,
What in the world is that?
What do you mean?
Levita used a mouse on the counter below the screen to pull up the feed and the sound for the electroconvulsive therapy room, or as it was more commonly called, the shock room. What she saw didn't make sense, even considering it was Halloween night. A clown in a dirty white costume who was splattered with blood stood beside a gurney, to which was strapped Elsie Mitchener, the poor girl who had lost both her parents a few weeks back. She had the electrodes of the ECT machine attached to her forehead. She was terrified and was crying. But, as strange as the scene was, it was made surreal by the presence of the capuchin monkey with painted face and pentagram-patterned suit who was standing on the gurney at Elsie's feet. Both the clown and the monkey were looking up at the camera as if waiting to be seen. As if sensing they were now seen, the monkey spoke.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here tonight to witness this thing called
Death. For a moment, Wilma seemed to be weak in the knees. She leaned back against the wall, staring with mouth open at the scene on the screen.
This is real, isn't it?
Clyde and Levita were of the small group of people in Nevermore Hollows who knew the town was plagued with supernatural creatures who were bent on destroying all that was good. Levita put a steadying hand on Wilma's shoulder.
Oh, girl, you are in for a ride.
Wilma took a beat to gather herself. She stood straighter, her face no longer a mask of shock, but instead one of wonder, as if she had come to a new understanding of the true nature of this world.
Okay, it's real. I accept it. Now, what do we do? Girl, I don't know,
Levita said.
He calls himself Psycho Juju. I had a run-in with him last year at the Pink Flamingos trailer park.
A mic sat on the desk in front of the display. Levita keyed it and said,
Don't you hurt that girl.
Psycho Juju chuckled.
Oh, I'm going to fry her delicate little brain, then cut it out of her skull and feed it to my pet clown. But in the spirit of fairness, I will give you 30 minutes to save her.
Levita considered the logistics of saving Elsie. The shock room was located at the far end of the north wing on the second floor. While Morningstar was a very large building, if they were undeterred in their efforts, it would only take 10 minutes to get there. Clyde knew what she was thinking.
He's demonic. He won't make it easy.
Let me explain the rules. You can't use any phones to dial out. I've taken care of that with a little spell. And I've made sure that no doors leading outside can be opened.
Levita keyed the mic.
That's still too easy. We know there's a catch. You just tell us what it is.
Psycho Juju gave a wide simian smile that was full of teeth and fangs.
I've let the crazies loose.
Levita's eyes shot wide. She knew the history of every single one of the patients in the South Wing. They were twisted, each in their own depraved ways, and had perpetrated such horrors on unsuspecting folks. Most were not even from around Nevermore Hollows, but had been shipped to them from bigger cities like Atlanta and Savannah. They were in grave danger. They looked at the camera feeds for the 2 South Wing floors that housed a total of 20 patients. Because these patients were dangerous, they were confined to their rooms, which were fitted with electronic security locks. As they watched, the lights on those locks flicked from red, indicating they were secure, to green. Immediately, the doors were pushed open, and the criminally insane crept out of their rooms into the dimly lit hallway. Some were male, others female, but they all shared a lust for murder. For a moment, they seemed confused, unsure as to what was happening. Then, as a group, they seemed to conclude that no one was coming to force them back into their rooms, and they bolted out of the hallway and into the main building. Wilma was trying to be strong, but her voice quavered and her hands trembled.
We'll never be able to make it to save Elsie. They'll kill us all.
And I have something special for you. A little Halloween treat.
He turned and said something to the clown that they could not make out. The clown stepped out of the frame for a moment. When he stepped back into view, he was pushing a gurney with Davy Dane strapped to it. Davy's eyes rolled wildly around in terror. He started begging and tears streamed down his face. Blood covered the front of his white uniform from the gunshot wound in his shoulder. With his left hand, the clown plucked from a stainless steel tray a tool that resembled an ice pick. With his broken pinky twisted out at an unnatural angle, it looked as if he were daintily holding the tool. With his right hand, he grabbed a small stainless steel mallet. Clyde knew that the ice pick was called an orbitoclast.
Those are lobotomy tools.
Levita keyed the mic.
Don't you do it. You let him go.
Psycho Juju glanced up at the camera.
But poor Davy is a sick little puppy.
He then nodded at the clown, who stabbed the ice pick down into Davy's right eye, puncturing the orb. Davy screamed in agony. The clown lifted the mallet and hammered the pick through Davy's brain. The sharp end broke through the back of Davy's skull, pinning him to the gurney. Clyde and Levita gasped as they watched Davy's body spasm. Wilma let out a single sob as tears spilled down her cheeks. Then her fear contorted into a righteous anger. Psycho Juju looked pleased with the result.
I think we've cured Davy of his condition.
I'm gonna kill you,
Levita said. Psycho Juju giggled.
What makes you think you can when angels have failed? The clock starts now.
Levita sprang into action. She snatched her cell from her pocket. Every member of the security team had access to the camera system via an app while on duty. She often used it so she could monitor the premises while they played cards in the break room.
That damn monkey said we couldn't call out, but I'm still connected to the building's Wi-Fi. Let me see if I can log into the security system.
Levita was able to log in to the security app.
Okay, looks like the inmates have split up, but we're good to go. I say we don't use the flashlights yet. I don't want to draw attention to us. Let's take a right, stick to the wall, make our way out to the basement, and then we can cross over to the north wing there.
There were 2 flashlights on the counter. Clyde grabbed one for himself and handed the other to Levita.
That'll help us navigate through the building. Wilma, you stay between us when we move.
Clyde nodded and opened the door. He stepped out first, his shotgun ready. Wilma stepped out behind him and Levita brought up the rear. They quietly shut the security room door and quickly made their way to the end of the corridor, which brought them to the large room that served as a commons area for the North Wing patients. They needed to cross that room to the door that led to the kitchen. From there, they could access a set of stairs that led to the basement. The room appeared to be empty, but it was large and furnished with couches and chairs and freestanding bookshelves. The shadows were deep. The crazies could be hiding anywhere in the room. From somewhere in the building, they heard glass break. Then, from another direction, they heard a scream and then a maniacal laugh. From down the corridor behind them, They heard the voice of a woman as she sang a hellish nursery rhyme. Cut and stab and hack and slash, I am gonna eat your flesh. They knew they had to move. Levita checked her phone.
It's too dark to see if anyone is in there.
Behind them, the woman sang, when it gushes like a flood, I am gonna drink your blood.
It'll take too long to stick to the wall. The best way is to cut directly across the room.
Levita quickly considered the pros and cons of both courses of action.
Use your light. We cut straight across. Let's go.
Clyde switched on his light and led the way. Halfway across the room, a man let out a guttural yell, shot from behind a bookshelf, and grabbed Wilma. She screamed when the inmate sunk his teeth into her shoulder. She twisted around and rammed her knife into his stomach. The man let go of her and coughed blood onto her face and neck. She grimaced and pushed him back. Levita brought up her weapon and fired a round into his chest. He dropped to the ground.
You okay?
Levita asked.
I'm good. He didn't break the skin. Okay, honey. Let's go.
They ran toward the kitchen door, and 2 more inmates jumped at them from behind chairs. As they did, they hooted and growled. Levita fired off a round, couldn't get a good aim due to the darkness, and missed. Clyde had better luck with his shotgun. He pumped around into both attackers and knocked them back. One fell over a chair. The other knocked over a bookshelf. They made it to the door with no other attacks. Clyde slid his key card, opened the door, and motioned for the women to step inside. He followed and slammed the door shut behind him. As he did, Wilma said,
Dear God.
He turned to see 2 of the psychotic inmates. One was a young woman with wild red hair. The other a black man with a shaved head. He lay on his back on the stainless steel preparation counter, while she used a razor-sharp boning knife to stab a design into his stomach. They both giggled as they were splattered with his blood. Clyde held the shotgun on the girl while Levita leveled her Glock at the man. Wilma inched toward the door that led to the basement. When she got there, she snatched a flashlight from the wall, then used her key card to open the door. She flicked on the flashlight and shone it down into the darkness. She nodded at them that it seemed clear. Neither of the inmates paid any mind as they continued their giggling while the redhead continued her stabbing. Levita and Clyde kept their guns leveled at them as they made their way to the basement. Clyde closed the door behind them.
Those 2 freaks must have a key card, or they wouldn't have been able to get into the kitchen. I don't think they'll follow us, at least not the guy. He won't be alive much longer with her stabbing him like that.
In the glow of Wilma's flashlight, it was clear that she was sickened by the sight. Levita had a grim look.
Either way, we need to move. Let's go.
They moved quickly down the stairs, Levita in the lead, Clyde in the back. They turned left. The 3 flashlights cut a swath in the darkness, but the basement was so massive that the shadows seemed to actively press against the light, and they felt more than fear. They felt oppressed. When they made it a third of the way across the dark basement, they heard the door from the kitchen open behind them. They turned off their flashlights and stood in the blackness, listening. For 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, they heard nothing. Then, in that disturbed, sing-song voice, they heard the nursery rhyming Psycho Woman. Cut and stab and hack and slash. I am gonna eat your flesh. The woman must have had a flashlight because they saw a blade of light cut into the darkness behind them. Then they heard her footsteps as she crept down into the basement.
Go, go!
Levita hissed. They clicked on their lights and ran, single file, across the basement. Behind them, the deranged woman sang, Then I will chew your brain. Maybe then I will be sane. They encountered no other crazies as they made their way across the vast room to the door that led up to the north wing. But when Levita swiped her card and pulled open the door, she gasped. Sitting on the third step up was Davy Dane's head, the lobotomy tool sticking from his eye. Across his mouth was a piece of surgical tape. On the tape was written, Hello.
Crap. That freaking little beast knew we'd come this way.
When Wilma saw Davy's head, she groaned. But Levita and Clyde could see she still was brimming with righteous resolve. They had no doubt that she was going to be okay and would do whatever she could to save Elsie. They stepped into the stairwell and shut the door behind them. They stepped over Davy's head and up to the second-floor landing. Clyde peeked through the small window into the dark hallway while Levita checked the camera feeds on her phone. From what they could both see, the hallway seemed clear. Levita then pulled up the feed to the shock room. Elsie was still strapped to the gurney, the electrodes attached to her temples. But other than that, she seemed okay. But again, as if knowing he was now being watched, Psycho Juju looked up at the camera and clasped his hands together.
I hope you like my little welcome gift. You're just in time while I cure another patient of his disease.
The clown pushed a wheelchair into view. Strapped in the seat was Lee Martinez. His eyes were wild with fear. "You're going to regret this, you asshole," he said. He struggled to free himself, but was unsuccessful. He was still bleeding from the gunshot wound in his leg. Psycho Juju ignored the big man, and keeping his eyes on the camera, he said,
Lee here has a long list of evil things he's done. He fondles the patients and sleeps with married women. My diagnosis is that poor Lee here is demon-possessed. But I think I can cure him with trepanation.
What's that?
Levita asked.
You cut a hole in the patient's skull to relieve pressure.
Wilma explained.
But in the Middle Ages, it was used on people suspected of being demon-possessed. It was thought to create a door for the demon to flee the body.
This is going to be bad,
Wilma said. Lee began to fight harder against his restraints. Psycho Juju gave a dramatic flick of his wrist toward the clown.
Let's cure this patient.
The clown shuffled over to the stainless steel cart that contained various medical tools. He selected a trephine, which was a 7-inch long tool with a short crossbar at the top, which made the instrument resemble a cross. It was basically a cylindrical saw which the physician would use by placing the tip against a skull and twisting the instrument by hand, thus removing a small chunk of bone. It took a skilled physician to not cut into the brain behind the bone. "Stop!" Lee yelled. "Don't do this, bastard! You get away from me! I'm going to kill you!" The clown shuffled over, grabbed a handful of Lee's greasy long hair, pulled his head back, and slammed the end of the trephine into his forehead. He began twisting as Lee thrashed about and screamed. It took only a moment for the clown to cut through the bone, but he continued twisting the sharp end of the trephine into Lee's brain. Blood drizzled down Lee's face and onto his shoulders and the floor. Bits of gray matter began working its way up through the wound as the clown continued twisting. After what seemed a gruesome eternity, Lee stopped screaming and his body went limp. His eyes became distant, unfocused. Thick ropes of drool poured from his mouth and spilled down his chin. He began mumbling incoherently. The clown stopped twisting and stepped back from Lee, leaving the tool sticking from his forehead.
It didn't look like Lee had any demons. He was just a douchebag. Well, my bad.
Levita and Clyde and Wilma stood in silent shock. From behind them, they heard the basement door open and close. Then, the insane nursery rhymer said, "Hello, handsome. Where might be the rest of you?" This spurred them into action. Clyde opened the door. Levita swept inside, her gun ready. Wilma followed, knife held out. Clyde stepped out and pulled the door shut. As he did, they could hear the insane nursery rhymer as she walked up the steps singing, "One step, 2 steps, such a pace. 3 steps, 4 steps, chew your face." Levita shined her light to their right, Clyde to their left. The top floor of the north wing did not have any current patients, and it seemed deserted. The shock room was the last door to their right. They could see a pale glow coming from the small window in the door. Levita glanced at the time on her phone. They had only 5 minutes until Psycho Juju used electric shock therapy on poor Elsie.
We cutting it close. Do we go in guns blazing, or do we take a more cautious approach?
Guns blazing.
They shot off down the hallway, single file, toward the shock room, determined to save the girl. Suddenly, one of the crazies shot from a room to their right. He was short, with wild hair and a mouthful of rotten teeth. He grabbed Levita's gun and tried to wrench it free. Wilma sprang into action. She stepped forward and slammed her knife into the crazy man's temple. She yanked the knife out and he stumbled back against the wall, then slid to the floor, dead.
Girl, I owe you one,
Levita said. Then she hustled to the shock room door. She peeked inside and saw that Psycho Juju was adjusting knobs on the ECT machine, while the clown checked the connections on Elsie's head. The poor girl was quiet, as if accepting her fate, but tears streamed down her eyes. Levita's heart ached at the scene. She said a silent prayer that this girl would someday heal from all the terrible things that had happened to her these past few weeks. But right now, before any healing could happen, they needed to save her. She pushed open the door and they stepped inside. Clyde leveled his shotgun at the clown, and Levita aimed at the monkey.
You step away.
Oh, not gonna happen. because it's showtime.
He grabbed the voltage dial on the ECT machine and cranked it to its highest setting. He then reached for the toggle switch that would give a burst of electricity to Elsie's brain, but Levita fired off a shot, hitting the little beast in the arm and knocking him off the gurney and onto the floor. Wilma saw her opportunity. She shot forward, grabbed the wire leads that connected the machine to Elsie's forehead, and cut them in two with her knife, thus making the machine ineffective. Clyde leveled his shotgun at the clown who hovered over Elsie. He couldn't fire in fear of hitting her. Levita stepped forward, trying to keep her bead on Psycho Juju, hoping he was dead. She was disappointed when he jumped up from the floor and onto the gurney beside the girl's head. He was bleeding from the wound in his arm and laughing maniacally. In his right hand, he held a scalpel.
Well, it looks like we've been defeated. It's time to go, but before I do, I have a joke. What do you think the murdering clown will say to the sheriff when he shows up? Let me spill my guts.
Psycho Juju then reached out and sliced open the clown's stomach. The clown gave no expression as the blade sunk deep and blood spurted from the front of his stained blouse. He looked down at the mess spilling from his body, then crumpled onto the floor. Psycho Juju gave a final laugh and snapped his fingers and disappeared in a black cloud that reeked of sulfur. Levita checked the clown to ensure that he was no longer a threat. Wilma began checking Elsie's vitals, speaking to her in soothing tones, while Clyde released her straps.
He's dead,
Levita said.
How's the girl? She's okay.
When Elsie was free, she grabbed Wilma in a tight hug. Wilma caressed her hair and said,
It's okay now, honey. You're safe.
Levita snatched her phone and saw that she now had cell service. She called the sheriff, told him the situation, then hung up.
Sheriff Mosley says we stay hunkered down here. He says he's sending out the cavalry. They should be here in less than 10 minutes.
Clyde stepped to the door and made sure it was locked. The nursery-rhyming woman leered at them through the small window. She had tattoos on her shaved head of various satanic symbols. She giggled and said, Cut and stab and hack and slash. I am gonna eat your flesh. Clyde grimaced at the woman, thankful that the door between them was unbreachable.
Why do you think Psycho Juju killed the clown?
Wilma asked. Clyde shrugged.
I don't know. I told you I fought the little bastard at the trailer park last year. He had a clown then and killed that one too. After Sheriff Mosley got to the scene, he told me that he always has a clown and kills it. We don't know why, but it's creepy as hell.
Clyde looked at Elsie. She was now fully awake, fully in control of her senses, and responding well to Wilma's healing touch. The girl had been through so much, and had been making progress before this horrific night had begun, and he intuited that she would continue to heal because she was strong. He fully believed that Psycho Juju had chosen Elsie for his sick game because of how hard she fought to recover and find beauty in the world, even after such tragedy. He regretted that they were not able to save Lee or Davy, but he was not self-deceived about them. Those two men were just as wicked in their hearts as the crazies who now had control of the sanitarium. Evil begets evil, he thought. If you live wickedly, you die wickedly. He turned back to the crazy woman who leered at them through the window, thankful that in only a few minutes Sheriff Mosley would arrive with reinforcements and this nightmare would be over. But Clyde knew that it would not last, because if fighting evil for over 50 years had taught him anything, it was that nightmares never went away. They only got worse with time.